Tiz, a vulnerable young Brazilian girl, finds herself speeding through the night towards the lights of a big city. Her companion is a man who has promised her parents that he will find their daughter work as a maid. What awaits her there is something different, however, and her life becomes increasingly fraught with danger, both mental and physical.
Interwoven into this tragic and violent storyline is the account of a young doctor whose life and love affair in the south of England are in stark contrast to the dangerous, sexually abusive situation in which Tiz finds herself. Yet their stories and that of their families become closely linked. You are listening to Tiz from the novel The Garden of Sparkling Delight by Deborah Vaughan.
Part 8. Thiago's Delight. As soon as Tiz's first punter departs, her friend Yara comes to her assistance. Both are young captive prostitutes in a Brazilian brothel. Tiz soon finds her life completely unendurable, and her health, both mental and physical, begins to decline. A migrant worker, Chinn, in a bicycle repair shop near the brothel, mourns his distant family.
As soon as she had hustled Aidan out of the room, Yara lifted Tiz in her arms and staggered through the open door, across the waiting area and up the staircase to their dormitory. Each stair was a challenge, as Tiz grew heavier with every step she took, but Yara's burning anger gave her the strength to struggle up to the top and kick open the bedroom door. Once inside, she summoned a last burst of energy and laid Tiz on her bunk. In the comparative seclusion of the bedroom, she did her best to care for her by fetching some old rag and wetting it under the tap. Then she gently bathed her friend's bruised thighs. Tiz lay on the bed, eyes tightly closed, moaning, her slight body rigid and her head turning from side to side, as if it were trying to escape on its own to some place of safety. As she attended to her friend, Yara spoke to her constantly in a low voice. It was a one-sided conversation, alternating between gentle endearments such as a mother would give to a small child who has fallen and injured itself badly, and outbursts of incandescent anger.
"Who do they think they are, these pigs?" she hissed through clenched teeth, her hand shaking with rage as she tenderly soothed battered muscle and torn flesh with a cool compress. "They buy us like cardboard cups, use us, then fling us away. How dare they?" The door opened softly, and there stood Thiago, listening to the tirade. He smiled to himself as he watched Yara at work.
"Come downstairs, Yara," he ordered curtly after a few seconds. "There's a customer waiting."
"No," she replied vehemently. "I'm staying here. Tiz needs me. That foreign bastard crucified her." Then she looked straight at Thiago and said in a voice white hot with fury, "This life will kill Tiz. You know that, don't you?" Smiling in amusement, Thiago padded across the floor and, taking Yara roughly by the shoulder, pushed her to the door.
"Shut up and come down," he said menacingly. "There's a customer waiting." Being a strong man, he had no difficulty in forcing Yara out of the dormitory. He began pushing her down the stairs, but Yara resisted, struggling against his hands, screaming and spitting at him. The girls in the hall looked up when they heard the commotion, as did the young man who'd just come in from the street. Seeing this, Thiago struck Yara hard across the face and shoved her roughly down the last few stairs. Holding her firmly by the arm, he said to the newcomer, "You want a challenge, mate? Here's one, a real firebrand." The man looked at Yara, and a smile of anticipation lit his face. "She'll do," he replied lecherously. "We'll go to room 1. and walking over to Yara, he twisted her arms behind her back and marched her into an empty bedroom. Thiago watched until Yara, still struggling and spitting, was safely inside, and then, smiling cruelly, went quietly back up to the prostitute's bedroom, where Tiz was lying half-conscious and alone on her bunk. "You need to be taught a lesson, little flower," he said softly. "I shall enjoy giving it to you." Silently, he glided across the room to where she lay.
Morning came at last, and Tiz awoke from a sleep that was more like unconsciousness than rest. Gradually, the awful memory of the previous night came back to her, as did the pain when she tried to move. "How can I do this? How?" she said over and over to herself. "Please let me die. Please, please." Gradually, she became aware that she was clutching something tightly in her right hand. What was it? She uncurled her fingers and found a large, crumpled handkerchief, which dropped onto the mattress beside her. Glancing down, she gave a little cry, caught the handkerchief up again and looked at it intently. There, in one corner, were the initials A.V., and twining round them were two little fishes worked in blue and red embroidery silk. "But this is my handkerchief," she gasped, scrabbling under her mattress where she'd hidden her shell, and the hanky that had been put over her face on the beach so many years before. To her astonishment, she found that both of them were still there. "But these are exactly the same," she said to herself in wonder, comparing them. "The same letters, the same little fishes. I've got two now. I suppose they must be common where that dreadful man came from." In a daze, she folded the second handkerchief carefully and put it with the first one back under the mattress.
That day, the turtle was forced to make the midday meal herself, as Tiz was too ill to even get off her bunk. Feeling cross and frustrated, she hurried around the kitchen preparing the food and pondering on what had gone wrong the night before. After a while, Thiago wandered into the kitchen looking for a snack. "Why are you preparing the food, Tia?" he asked harshly.
"Little Flower is sick," replied the turtle shortly.
"She's too sick to work tonight?" Thiago asked apprehensively, wondering if the old woman had found out about his own abuse of Tiz the previous evening.
"I've been thinking about that," replied the turtle, "and I don't think she's ready yet. I don't know what went on with the English boy, as I was in the kitchen while he was in the bedroom. When I came back, I found him slumped on a chair with his trousers in a heap at his feet. I had to help him on with them. Neither he nor the fat old man with him said anything after that. They just went. The only thing I can think of is that she was too scrawny."
"Yes, she is," replied Thiago, who knew at first hand just how thin Tiz was. "But do you really think that was the reason?"
"Yes, I do," replied the turtle. "That young foreigner certainly didn't like her, and I'm sure it was because she's so thin. What else could it be? She's going to have to fatten up before men find her sexually attractive. And besides, I've nobody else to cook and clean at the moment. Don't want to have to pay a woman to come in to do it, do I?"
"Why not sell her?" suggested Thiago thoughtfully. "I've got a friend who's just got rid of one of his girls. She was too ill to work. Maybe he would buy her off us cheaply. But then," he added, "I guess she would be too thin for him too. And she would be too old anyway. He deals in children, not girls as old as Little Flower."
"I don't suppose he'd be interested," agreed the turtle, "and I'd still have to find a cook. Anyway, there's another thing," she added. "After a while, we can pass her off as a virgin again to some other foreign pig."
So Tiz had a reprieve, but the next day there was a new cross waiting for her. She'd just carried the pots of beans and rice into the dining room and had seated herself painfully at the table next to Yara, when the turtle came into the room. Seeing the two friends sitting together, she said shortly,
"Sit next to me, little flower." Wondering what was going to happen, Tiz did as she was told. The old woman then proceeded to put a large helping of food onto a plate and, pushing it under Tiz's nose, said curtly, "Eat this, all of it." Tiz looked at the mound of beans and rice in dismay. "I can't eat that much," she whispered in despair. "I'm not hungry." "If you don't eat it, Alexio will beat you. Won't you, Alexio?" the turtle added as the doorman came lumbering into the dining room.
"My pleasure," he answered in a matter-of-fact way. "Eat up. You're as scrawny as a starving chicken. I'm not surprised that foreigner didn't want you." And he sat down and began to attack his own food with gusto. Both Tiz and Yara then immediately understood what was happening.
"If I eat this," Tiz thought to herself in desperation, "they'll make me be a prostitute. But if I don't, I shall be beaten. What can I do?" Slowly, spoon by spoon, she managed to shovel the food into her mouth. The turtle watched her coldly like an evil scientist who dispassionately checks a person he is experimenting on to see how close to death they can be pushed without actually dying.
After she had finished cleaning up, Tiz fled upstairs to the bedroom. Yara, who was lying on her bunk, looked up as her friend came into the room. She had been deep in thought and was abstractedly twisting the belt of her wrap in her fingers, pulling it this way and that, as she tried to think up a way of helping her friend.
Tiz scrambled up beside her. "Yara, what am I going to do?" she asked desperately. "The turtle is trying to fatten me up. That means I'm safe for the moment, but the minute I get fatter, I shall have to be a prostitute. Help me, please." And she clutched at Yara's arm in despair. "I know," Yara replied bleakly. "The only thing I can think of is that when the turtle isn't looking, Yaritza, Magdalena or I will take a little food from you. The others will help too, as we all hate her so much it will be good to spoil her plans. I can't think of anything else," she added miserably, putting her arm around her friend.
More than a year passed in a succession of indistinguishable dreary days. Tiz cooked endless meals, cleaning and scrubbing with desperate energy in order to make herself indispensable in the kitchen. In the afternoons, Yara sometimes helped her so that the two of them could be together. So the sparkling delight began to shine with cleanliness, even if it didn't sparkle with happiness. But despite her best efforts in the kitchen and her determination not to eat very much, at last Tiz began to look more nubile.
"You begin work this evening, little flower," remarked the turtle casually one day as Tiz scuttled across the waiting hall after clearing up the evening meal. She stopped short halfway up the stairs, frozen with horror. It had come at last. She'd failed.
A little while later, her legs trembling with terror, Tiz crept down the stairs, holding tightly onto Yara's hand. Gingerly she sat down on the couch with her best friend on one side of her and Magdalena on the other. Keeping very still, she closed her eyes, willing the punters not to notice her. She heard the street door open and Alexio's loud voice saying something she couldn't quite catch.
"Yara," she whispered, "someone's coming in." Yara squeezed her hand encouragingly, and Tiz heard the turtle shout, "Magdalena, go to room 2. Magdalena got up and walked across the hall to the bedroom. Tiz groaned. Then almost immediately she heard footsteps approach the couch. Shrinking back against the cushions, she desperately clutched Yara's hand. A fetid odour of stale sweat mixed with cigarettes enveloped her, and in terror she opened her eyes and found herself looking up into an eager, lustful male face, glistening with sweat and anticipation. Then the man grasped Yara's arm, and before Tiz could cry out, her hand was wrenched out of her protectors and she was left on her own. 5 minutes went by as Tiz watched the entrance corridor in pure terror. Who would come in next? All too soon, a fat, middle-aged man ambled into the hallway. Tiz saw him speak to the turtle, who muttered something to him and pointed across the room. With horror, she saw him look straight at her.
Squaring his shoulders, he came strutting over to her couch. "I'm told you need some lessons, little flower," he sneered. "Come, I'll give you your first with pleasure." And grasping her firmly by the arm, he marched her into the bedroom. "You won't need that," he rasped harshly, snatching at her wrap and pulling it off. For a long minute he looked appraisingly at Tiz, who stood naked and trembling before him. "Get on there," he commanded, with faltering steps on legs that threatened to buckle under her. Tiz went over to the bed and lay down watching in revulsion as her tormentor took off his large trousers and came slowly towards her, a cruel smile hovering round his lips. And so, for the third time in her life, Tiz found herself spread-eagled with a semi-naked male body on top of her. But this one didn't give up so easily as the first, and again she felt all the breath squeezed out of her as he thrust her repeatedly into the hard mattress. She felt as if she was suffocating, and when at last it was over, she drew a deep, shuddering breath, surprised that she could still breathe at all. She didn't notice the fat man stuffing himself back into his trousers, however, as the unaccustomed smell of semen made her gag with disgust. She then became aware that he'd smeared it over her thighs and even her breasts. Tentatively, she touched it with her finger, and then, grasping the sheet, scrubbed at it in a frenzy of revulsion. Seeing what she was doing, her tormentor said in a satisfied voice, "You won't get many punters as good as that whore, even though they're younger." Filled with loathing and trembling with shock, Tiz scrambled off the bed as fast as her shaky legs could manage and made for the corner of the room, where she brought back all the beans and rice the turtle had stuffed into her earlier in the day. It lay in a noxious puddle round her feet, and it was now the turn of the fat man to be revolted, his satisfaction at his sexual prowess turned to anger. "You'll never be a decent whore," he shouted. "I want my money back." And he stormed out of the room, banging the door behind him. Tiz slumped down on the floor in a wretched, miserable heap, seeing an endless succession of days and nights stretching out in front of her, black with pain and never-ending abuse.
"I can't do this. I can't, she murmured brokenly. "Not even fit to be a prostitute. I wish I was dead. Yara, oh Yara, please come and rescue me." But there was no friend to help this time. Yara was busy in another bedroom, and instead it was the turtle who came angrily into the room. "Get the bucket and clear up this disgusting mess, little flower," she commanded. "If you do that again, Alexia will beat you. Then go back to the couch." So the night went on, with punter after punter coming and going in a never-ending ordeal of torture. Finally the last one left, and Tiz was left lying in total exhaustion on the bed, the smell of semen filling her nostrils. Not for her the perfume of tender love, but instead the smell of vicious torment. Trembling and in pain, she crawled up the stairs into the dormitory, where she went over to the wash basin and began frantically to sponge herself with shaking hands. At that moment Yara came into the room. Seeing what Tiz was doing, she came quickly across, and gently removing the cloth from the girl's stiff fingers, began to wipe the semen and vomit away with quick, deft strokes. Looking at her friend, Tiz saw that tears were streaming down her face. "Oh, Yara," she whispered brokenly, "what can I do? I shall die." "No, you won't," retorted Yara fiercely, catching her breath on a sob. "Remember, I'm stronger than you are, and I'm going to rescue you. They're not going to steal our lives from us, Tiz. I won't let them."
But as the days turned into weeks and the never-ending abuse continued, Tiz did indeed begin to die. At first it didn't show particularly, because it was happening so slowly inside her. Gradually, however, she began to lose the power to think and to relate to the other girls, even Yara. Her emotions became numb and cold, and nothing seemed to matter anymore. Her only relief was in the deep, exhausted sleep, which descended like a dark shroud in the early hours of each morning, after the last customer had departed. Eating, washing, talking, all became automatic actions as if performed by someone else who was living in the shell that was her tormented body. Any free moments she had between waking and work, she sat on Yara's top bunk, cradling her shell and gazing out of the barred window above the bed with eyes that were lifeless and traumatized. There were no tears, no cries. The black well of unhappiness where she now lived was too deep for these. Profound black depression engulfed her, and she knew that she would never feel clean again as long as she lived. Her only consolation was the memory of that glorious experience at the seaside when she'd sat in the warm, shallow sea and the water had covered her small body, softly and lovingly caressing those tender secret parts, which were now being tortured each night by the rough, dirty hands and bodies of her tormentors.
To add to her misery, Tiz also had to take her turn in the brothel's window, into which one of the girls was locked each afternoon, so that the passers-by could see the delights which were offered inside. There they had to sit, mere bodies for sale to the highest bidder, with no more worth than a chair or a table.
"Smile, Tiz," said Alexio threateningly, as he pushed her into the cramped shop window one afternoon a few weeks later. "Just remember what happened last time you were looking so miserable, and the old woman saw you."
"How could I forget?" Tiz thought dismally. "You beat me, you bastard." As if reading her thoughts, Alexio remarked,
"Yes, I beat you. And remember, I enjoy beating you, Tiz. Why not give me that pleasure again?" And with a cruel smile hovering round his mouth, he bolted the window hatch behind her. It was stiflingly hot, and Tiz sat bolt upright, her jaws aching from the fixed smile she was trying to maintain. She didn't even notice the passing crowds or the expressions of the men who leered at her through the glass, their faces distorted by the window panes, as her mind was empty of all emotion. Suddenly, she became aware of a flicker of movement in the corner of her prison, and looking down, saw a small lizard, one tiny foreleg raised for instant flight.
"Lucky, lucky Lagato," she murmured to the lizard. "You're free, and I'm a prisoner. You're clean, and I'm dirty. I'd give anything to change places with you. If I were a lizard," she thought miserably, "I would run and run away from this hateful city straight back home. There I'd live in a crack in the wall and gaze at my beloved family. Each day I would creep out and watch them. Just being in the same room would be enough." At the thought of her parents and Davy, her eyes filled with tears and her lips began to tremble. Hastily she brushed them away and resumed her plastic smile, but her mind was far away, and her heart was as cold as ice.
The tiny gear wheel dropped onto the floor for the fourth time, and Chinn swore with exasperation. He'd been working on the bicycle now for almost an hour and was feeling very frustrated. As supervisor in the bike shop, he got the most difficult jobs to do, and although this meant that he earned more money, some of the bikes were almost impossible to mend. They were so old. He stood up, rubbed his back and looked round. The workshop was cramped and smelled of oil, dirt and sweaty bodies. Tools hung in racks on the walls, and the floor had a thin coating of oil all over it, which made it slippery on wet days. Near the door, a couple of trainees were busy renovating old bikes for resale, and since they seemed to be working hard, he thought he'd take a short break to ease his aching back. So he fetched himself a cup of water and lounged on an old box by the open street door, his back against the wall of the shop.
The workshop was situated on a steep hill, and Chinn watched the dense throng of humanity that was the poor of the city, toiling incessantly up and down, going about their weary business. His mind turned, as it often did, to his home so many hundreds of miles away. This heaving ant-hill, where even the weeds had to fight to survive, was in stark contrast to the tranquillity of the countryside where he had been brought up. He remembered with a sharp stab of homesickness the beauty of the brilliant green paddy fields near his house and the tree-lined tracks jewelled with wild flowers, over which at certain seasons of the year an ever-changing kaleidoscope of painted butterflies fluttered. Imprinted on his memory, too, was the breathtaking sight of the sun shining through the early morning mist as he and his father walked to their day's work in the fields. And if he concentrated hard, he could almost feel the squelch of the mud as it oozed in between his toes when he paddled along the river's edge. Even the sounds were different from city sounds. Here, the rain made a hard, unforgiving noise as it bounced off brick walls and concrete roads, beating a heavy metal tattoo on the corrugated iron roof of the workshop. But at home, it sang a tender song as it caressed the leaves and grass and sank gently into the thirsty earth. The many miles that separated him from his family seemed like an unbridgeable distance to Chinn.
You have been listening to Tis from the novel The Garden of Sparkling Delight. You may find more information by searching the web for The Garden of Sparkling Delight.